Welcome to the Intelligence Amplifiers, podcast that celebrates the people who make the intelligence a collective superpower. In every episode, we uncover the stories of learning and development leaders who amplify knowledge, break down silos, and empower teams to thrive. These are the enablers of insight, the ones turning expertise into action and shaping the future of work by ensuring that the right knowledge reaches the right people at the right time. So, if you're ready to explore how the intelligence is amplified and shared across organizations, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Intelligence Amplifiers. Today, we're talking to Eric Grant. Hello, Eric.
Hey.
Great to have you on the episode. So you're at Figma these days doing learning and development there, right? And we'll get to that. But I wanted to start sort of with the earlier career. I believe you studied English and you wanted to write books. So what was that like? The early aspirations.
Yeah, totally. I was an English major, English and history major in school. Wanted to write books, have written a few books, nothing crazy, but still a passion, maybe sometime something I'll do later in life again. I really fell into teaching and learning, not a ton of career prospects coming out of school with an English and history double major. So my school let me teach abroad in South Korea, which I did for a year. Loved that experience. Came back to the States, moved to a different city. Was looking for any work, got set up with this startup. Didn't really know what a startup was at the time. One thing led to another, but as that company started to grow, we're like, what do you want to do aside from writing books? And the only thing I'd really done was I had done some teaching, and actually randomly also in college had a job at a company called Epic, which is a massive healthcare software company in Madison, Wisconsin, outside Madison, Wisconsin, and had been on their training team. So I had kind of seen how that worked, although it was very different kind of operation than what they were asking. But I said, hey, I can teach, and maybe I can just teach our new hires how to do this job. That's really the only experience I've had that I've liked. And they let me do that, run onboarding, and then slowly pick up and learning and development that way. But yeah, so that's like the path from English major to L&D and the kind of fluke way I got started with that. But yeah, still at the end of the day, kind of a literature nerd, and maybe an aspiring author again someday.
It's pretty cool. Nobody seems to go to school for learning and development, right?
Yeah.
It's like we all kind of fall into it one way or another. So that's why I always love those like early moments. And startups are, so amazing for that sort of like you can be jack of many trades and explore different things and really see what your passion is and what resonates and just raise your hand and go for it. So it seems like that's what you took advantage of.
Yeah, exactly. And I got lucky that startup scaled, especially on the people side. And so I went from training one person how to do something to 2 to 5 to starting to do cohorts of 10 or 15. And this is 2012 in a remote company. So we're doing this on Google Hangouts was what it was called at the time. Skype we tried too as well. So like dating the technology there, but really having to learn how do you onboard remotely? How do you do that for new people? These were new skills at the time, right? And they've paid off now that we're doing that, whether you're onboarding or training or just doing something digitally. But so I was lucky to be ahead of the curve, lucky to get scale in the way that we were growing. And I think the last part that I've got as a piece of advice in startups that's really stuck with me is if your startup does scale and grow and you don't learn how to scale and grow your job in that startup, they're going to have to replace you, right? They're going to need somebody who can operate at that scale. So if you go from, I was employee 8 to 30 to 300, eventually beyond that, you have to be able to operate at that scale too. And if you don't have the skills or frankly, like the curiosity, desire to grow like that, then they're going to have to say, okay, we'll hire somebody above you and then you can keep operating more locally how you are. And so it really lit a great fire for me to learn very quickly. If I'm going to do this learning and development thing, which is very odd and new, I should really learn how to do it as best I can. And that was, reading books and going to ATD at the time. And what is this? Following people where I could and, finding any experts and mentors that would help me, which I was lucky to find some of those too. So yeah.
I like what you said about so it's a forcing function. You gotta be on top of it. You gotta have the skills. But I like what you said about curiosity and having the curiosity and sort of like a desire. I
Yeah.
think that really trumps everything else because that's where it starts, right?
Yeah.
Like those are the qualities that will enable you to pick up the skills and grow. I would
Yeah.
imagine.
Correct. And there was no learning team at that. Like I was the learning team at that startup. So getting any kind of formal learning from the company on that growth wasn't going to happen. So it was really an impetus of my own curiosity and drive to go learn, externally how to do this thing. And I think a lot of other people in startups that don't have that structural environment, it has to be a curiosity or drive, inherent in you intrinsically that gets you, learning that fast.
Got it. Got it. And so you went from this tiny little startup that it went, it scaled pretty fast, but then you went to Uber,
Mhm.
right? Of
Yeah.
all, places. So how did that happen? How was that different or the same?
Yeah, it was so different. I actually just hit my uh last month was 10 years from when I started at Uber, and I was doing some reflection and writing about this. That experience was so crazy, like in every way. I like even the first real interview I had with them, I forgot it. And I was in Vancouver, I was on the West Coast, and I got the times mixed up, and I had limited minutes on my phone in Canada. So it was like I took this interview at the beach against a tree, like hope, like fingers crossed I had enough minutes to make it through, and just like how weird it was. Um, I got lucky. I had a friend who was at Uber who put a referral in for me. I found people that really got who I was. Megan, who hired me, is still a friend, and just we just clicked really well. But it was so different. I think what they saw was that drive to learn, that ability to scale and upskill myself or upscale myself really with what the startup was doing that they also needed. But Uber was like arriving on another planet, right? Like it was at that time, I think the fastest growing company like ever, like at that scale. And I was coming from a little startup that was remote. This was moving back to Chicago, being in an office every day, being with this team every day, but then also like crazy global expansion. And I remember like my first month there, I made a slide deck for a training, and I got a message on our chat that from someone in the Philippines, like, "Hey, I'm about to run this training. Uh, there's a typo on slide 20 or this, speaker note." I'm like, "Who? How did you get my deck? What are you doing?" And it was like, "Oh, I got your deck from so and so, and we're going to train the same thing. And we have a class of 40 starting next week. We're getting ready for." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like this was meant for me, not for a program to do it." But nobody really cared at that point. Like we were moving so fast, it was whatever resources you could get your hands on. And I realized that some of the things I was going to build were going to become global very quickly. Um, and I wasn't going to have control over them and had to surrender some of that, but know that the scale was going to be huge and really think of that. And Uber worked at that time where some of the work we were doing in Chicago at that site was sort of the first site we were doing something at, and then it would go to these other sites around the world. And so we were setting the tone, and people that got hired to be learning folks would come shadow me in Chicago as like kind of the first in its role. So yeah, it was totally different scale, different people, different setup, different in the office versus remote. Um, but just an amazing secondary education in how fast things expand and what things we got to do and the kind of trainings we got to build and the scale we built them for. And we were training, thousands of people in support to do things around the world with custom tools on these apps of which crazy new things were happening on all over the world. So I think of that as just like a tremendous other educational piece that I got to do very early in my career that set me up very nicely for the future.
That's awesome. I love how you said it's not only upskilling yourself, but it's upscaling yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good soundbite right there. Um, So, and I had an opportunity to work with Uber's engineering learning or enablement team. And what struck me interesting about the company is that, in a normal company, you sort of have like, welcome to, here, and, here's the onboarding. And it tends to be the same onboarding worldwide. But Uber had sort of like this model where it's like, well, there's part that is the same, but then there's a lot of autonomy that is local, right?
Yeah.
Because a team in Bangalore is going to do things differently than the team in Chicago. And sure, there's some commonality, but there's also enough freedom to be autonomous and do things differently. How did that impact your work
Oh
there?
man, it made things a lot more difficult, but in a way that I understood. I think, Uber was really maybe the best education part of that was just seeing how a business worked a little bit. The startup, you saw a business growing, but, we were really, operating small or kind of making decisions day by day. Uber was a global business moving at insane speed. And yeah, really, really allowed local teams to work differently, which was a huge part of its success. And I got to meet people that did all sorts of experiments and things that were in Toronto and Miami. And I learned these amazing cultural differences and language differences around the world. But I trained our support function, and that made things so, so, so hard, so complex because when we launched Uber Eats, the way that we handled restaurants mishandling an order in Miami was different than we did it in Buffalo or Chicago or Milwaukee, right? And like, so for support every time it's okay, I got this ticket. Where is this? What are the local rules? What do I need to abide by? New York City has this, TLC thing. Vancouver doesn't have Uber, but they want it. How do we treat these folks? And so there was a real complexity layer in the support world, and then a huge layer of documentation challenges, and training people how to find these things and local regulations and deal with tickets. That's one reason we had such a robust training and support operation for that, was just like we added layers of complexity so that the business could grow really well in its markets. And you got to see that like secondarily of like, wow, this is really doing things locally in Miami is really going to grow Miami. So, yeah, crazy good education there, and just like a business's growth and what you can do locally.
Yeah, and you also mentioned you just talked about how learning was actually an unlock for growth, right? So it wasn't just like here's a nice thing to do, but it was essential to be able to develop that market and grow and do things properly, right? And
For
scale.
sure. Yes, like the playbooks and enablement of different people around the world and sharing huge reason Uber was so successful. Yeah, really, really amazing to see that.
Yeah. And so after Uber, I believe you went to LinkedIn Learning, right? Customer success there. So I would
Yeah.
imagine you kind of got to work a little bit on the other side of the equation as well, and not work on a learning product and support people that would need learning and run programs themselves. How was that?
Yeah, that's right. Well, actually, in between Uber and LinkedIn, I took a year off, uh, traveled the world, wrote a book,
Hmm.
didn't know if I was ever going to work again, didn't know where things were going to take me. Met my now wife and moved to New York, and yeah, got a job at LinkedIn, and the rest is history. Um, yeah, LinkedIn Learning, I switched to working internally as a customer success manager, and I worked specifically with our biggest customers. So like real Fortune 100, but in a few cases, like Fortune 10 companies, just really, really massive companies buying this software. But our real goal was to get embedded in their learning programs. And the only reason I got that was because we had gotten LinkedIn Learning at Uber and had been so successful in rolling it out, um, that when I told that story to LinkedIn, they okay, hey, go repeat that or help us repeat that at these other companies. And it's hard. It's a piece of learning software. You're competing for attention. You're competing with lots of other things happening at people's jobs. I think it's only harder today than it was in 2019, but you really have to tell a good story and do a good job, thorough job marketing a tool like that to get the attention. So a lot of it was going to these, heads of learning at these companies, or functional heads of learning in different orgs. What are your goals? What are you trying to do? How are you marketing learning today? How does LinkedIn fit into that? Or what else can we tell you about how to market this? Um, And that was a great experience. I got to meet a lot of really, really good learning thinkers that became sort of quasi mentors and help them. And I think the biggest piece on top of that was that we got a ton of data, right? Because I was going to companies with hundreds of thousands of employees and I could see how they were using, when they were using LinkedIn Learning, what they were watching, how long they were watching for, job profiles aligning to certain courses. It really scratched this itch I had of understanding learning data, which went back to Uber, where they really pushed us on data and measurement. But LinkedIn was really where I really got to see that. So again, I pushed myself to kind of skill myself up on that data side. Got some really good encouragement for LinkedIn, and actually while there, started a master's program in analytics. And at the second half of my LinkedIn tenure, actually worked on the data side there, where I would use like very long and intense SQL queries to go through LinkedIn's insanely rich skill and learning data set and come out with insights that would scale. And then they had this amazing tool that you could build auto, presentations in PowerPoint on, that you could take these decks and compare. Here's how your learning penetration is compared to your peer group, and here's the acceleration of that. And here's different job profiles that are looking at like core skills and secondary skills. And I even got to do stuff of like, here's how your marketing campaign is influencing learners and push learners versus pull learners. And amazing job. I really loved, I mean, pure kind of data, but really thinking through, if I can tell any story with this rich set of data, what's the most impactful story I can tell, not just for one customer, but for all of our customers? And then how do we tell that story? Um, so yeah, amazing, opportunity, got to scratch an itch for data and really do my first kind of data intensive job, where most of my job was writing SQL and thinking what that SQL and code was what story was going to tell.
Yeah. And I just want to highlight this. So you went from being a user of LinkedIn Learning to working at LinkedIn Learning and deploying to like Fortune 10, Fortune
Yeah.
100 companies and getting insights into how learning is affecting hundreds of thousands of employees out there.
Yeah.
And then getting even more curious about like not just empirical sort of evidence, but actually crunching the data. And I believe you completed a master's in data
Yeah.
science, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you kind of like really took this like measuring impact of learning seriously, like to the next level. So yeah.
Very much. COVID was a part of that too. I found myself
Uh-huh.
with some extra time on my hands, and Georgia Tech had this data science program that was online. But yeah, I really did. I like going back to Uber for a minute. Uber, what I saw at Uber when I wanted to expand my programs or get resources, even LinkedIn Learning, when we tried to buy that, was the leaders there were very rigorous around, show me the data. What's the impact going to have? Why should you get budget, headcount, and the people that were winning, getting what they wanted, had the data and the story behind the data. And I didn't have much of that. Like, it only kind of occurred to me seeing that. And so when I got to LinkedIn and had the data, it was like, okay, I have data now. What can I do with it? And yeah, once I pulled that thread, especially centered around learning, it felt like a thread that I still think it doesn't end. And it's a very hard thing. And can certainly talk about where that's taken me around measurements. Um, but yeah, I just got so interested in this question of what is the data around learning, but more specifically, what can you do with it, that either gets resources or expands your profile or your potential or what you're capable of. And then, yeah, work with a lot of folks now about, how do we tell that story?
Mhm. Yeah, I've been working with LinkedIn, the company, for a while on their internal learning. So not LinkedIn Learning, but how they learn internally, especially engineers. And I had the pleasure of meeting Rajan there. He used to be in charge of their learning development engineering education, and this is one of the things that he geeks out a lot on, like the impact of learning. So we've had a number of conversations about the impact, measuring all that. And as you know, it's one of those things that's really hard to kind of like measure impact of learning in isolation. So I appreciate your sort of rigorous approach to both looking at the data and like telling the story with that data
Yeah.
and getting insights. So that's very cool. So that was LinkedIn and learning, and then you went to Coin, right? Coinbase,
Yeah.
right? What brought you there? Different organization, a little smaller, faster growth, I would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, that last role at LinkedIn was a data role, and I was nearly done with that master's degree. And, that was kind of the biggest fork in the road I've had in my career. It was either keep pursuing data, maybe around learning, maybe around people analytics. That was sort of growing at the time. That could be a niche I carve out in data, but even like, do I want to be a data scientist now as I've, invested in the skill set, or do I want to go back to the learning side? And Coinbase really came out of the blue with this offer to lead a large team, uh, like the Uber role. I had a team of 18 that was going to be under me. We were doing training for, at that time, at least 5,000 different support reps across all the different types of support Coinbase was doing, compliance, customer service, et cetera. And so just the scale and opportunity was so appealing. And when I told them my story about wanting to use data and kind of carving that out, they were very interested. So I wound up getting an offer there, doing a lot of thinking about, where in that fork do I want to go? And I love data, I really do. I don't know if I would be where I would get to if I was doing, data science on the regular. I really do love learning, and ultimately came back to it and still want to do it. I just am fascinated by how we help how we help people be better at their jobs, or really how we help them be better at anything. But in this world where I'm getting paid to do this, it's usually help people be better at their jobs. And people's jobs are different, organizations are different, investments are different, tools are different, platforms are different, and yet still this goal, and then showing the goal is working. It's a fascinating thing. And so Coinbase just felt like an opportunity to do that at a big scale with a big team, well resourced. um, at least at the time I was hired. Things deteriorated fast in crypto and Coinbase at the time, but that's why I sort of went there. And for a while, it was really really great doing that, and we had some really astounding success with some of our programs there too.
Yeah. Career-wise, I believe magic happens when you kind of find the intersection of two passions, right? At least, right? And so you having a passion for learning and passion for data, that probably made you irreplaceable when you applied for that. Like, compared to anyone else that only had a passion for, say, learning, I would imagine.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah.
I like to think so. There's the old, not so old, but advice. I don't know if Mark Andreessen wrote it or just reported on it, but this idea of being the top 25% in the top 25% of two things, right? And if you can do that, it's the combination of those things that kind of makes you unique, rather than just, trying to be good at one thing, which is admirable. And if you can be really good at one thing, you're going to be on a great path as well. But yeah, I really felt like it's, like you said, it's the combination, or sort of where that Venn diagram meets, not just of skills, but really of passion, right? And wanting and trying to get better at these things at the same time, and what that can bring to a job. So yeah, very, very much agree.
Got it. Very cool. Very cool. And so Coinbase obviously was a nice ride. And then you ended up going to Figma, where you're at now, right? How did you end up at Figma? What kind of excited you about that? What was the opportunity?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I got to Figma by a fluke, honestly.
Mhm.
I knew the company, and we actually did some really interesting stuff with Figma at Coinbase, because we had to train a lot of people in the Philippines about customer service from the Coinbase app. But the Coinbase app at the time, I don't know if it still is, was banned in the Philippines, right? So our audience couldn't use this app that we needed them to at least see and understand. And so I had a learning designer who sort of mocked it up in Figma and built a prototype of the app so we could train different buttons, get you different places and do that. And so that, I had, and friends were making apps and got to see Figma. So I knew what it was. I knew kind of its positioning. Um, but I just had an old co-worker at Coinbase reach out on behalf of me without me knowing it to someone at Figma that said, if you're looking for a learning person that has this data background, you should talk to this guy, who was me. And I talked to our VP and they said, all right, well, maybe we'll have a role for you in a month. And I think 6 months later, they came back and they said, okay, now we have a role. And I
Mm.
interviewed, a hard interview, and wound up here. And I think really, I do mean that it was a hard interview for good reason. And one thing I loved that, really keeps me energized here is that interview. We had one final one and with my now VP, and they really were like, tell me what your, almost like wildest dream for this role is. Like what would you do that I'm not going to hear in another interview? And I pitched them on this kind of, I want to do this, like I want to build this personalized, spaced repetition, Duolingo platform for learning Figma, for learning your software, because I think it's really hard to learn outside of that with all sorts of caveats and explanations on top of that. But I want to build this engine that really personalizes learning for everyone, because from what you've told me, all of your audience is at different levels of familiarity with Figma, but all need to know it very well to answer these questions that customers are giving us. And they liked that, and like, credit to them for giving me the space to like open up and do something creative in an interview and take my shot, not with a standard answer, but with something I don't even know if I could do at the time. And I think I told them in the interview, like, there's no platform that's doing this exactly out there. There's ones that are kind of making this and getting there. And this is, I think, the future and where this is going. And yeah, it worked out. And Figma is such a cool company. It's really been great. I just hit 2 years here yesterday, I think, and so collaborative, so much talent in the design space. It's taught me so much about how good design can change an experience, especially in learning. And, I talked about like LinkedIn Learning, this competition for attention and this idea of marketing, learning, right? Like design does a lot of that work for you. And I had great designers that I've worked with before, learning designers, but not necessarily on the visual part or just the creation of the experience. They were really thinking through like learning penetration and skill transfer and knowledge transfer. And that's great. But some of just the visualization and warmth and welcomeness of a training experience that folks create here on my team and otherwise really makes you want to use these things, do these things. So yeah, can talk a lot more, but it's been great. And really another piece of new learning that I'm taking here is a lot around the design and the collaboration front.
Yeah. Well, congrats on your Figma anniversary.
Thank you.
That's awesome. And you mentioned you got the job by a fluke, and I wonder how much it's a fluke versus, again, that Venn diagram of
Yeah.
like being a
Yeah.
badass in data and caring a lot about learning.
Yeah.
I think that that's where your vision for this new way of like learning, what is essentially a very complex product. We're big users and fans of
Yeah.
Figma, and I totally get it. And I think again, that curiosity and the cross section of data and learning is what made you uniquely positioned to create that vision. So
Thank you, Marco. Yeah.
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 So how's that going? What are you excited about? Like, what's on the horizon, I guess, for what you're building at Figma?
Yeah. So, it's the challenge that remains, but that changes its face often, which is, I run our learning team for our support function here. That means it's a lot of functional enablement around our products and suite of products and the features within those products. So that problem never goes away. And the way Figma, like most modern software companies, ship is something new is coming every day, every week, certainly every month. And we need to think about how we enable and train our field to know those things, know them not so that they use the products or know the products or feel familiarity with the products, but so that they can answer customer questions about those. And that distinction for me is very important because customers don't write into support and say, "Hey, how does Figma make work? Tell me about it." Like, that's, customer education and resources. What they're asking is, I am trying to do this. Here's where I'm being blocked. Help me. And you need to understand the nuances of all the parts of that equation. What are they doing? What limitations are they hitting? Why are they trying to do this? Why would our tool maybe be a blocker here? Is that expected behavior? Is it non expected behavior? So it's teaching them about these tools and training them, but with very specific endpoints and outputs that you want, which is being able to answer questions. Um, as we trace my career, I've done this similar thing now at Coinbase and at Uber, where I'm running training teams for support environments. So there's a familiarity here with what I'm doing, but there's a very unique thing about Figma that's different than Coinbase and Uber that I think a lot. And I boil that down to uh, some of our customers know more about Figma than we do, right? You mentioned you and your team are in there a lot. We have designers and Figma users that are in Figma every day for many hours. They are getting to points in that piece of software that our support team doesn't get to regularly, right? They're using Figma every day. We're doing support every day, which includes troubleshooting and replicating in these things, but we don't have that level of familiarity always with our tool. We have nooks and crannies that we know and things that we've seen, and certainly common questions that have been asked and answered, but we have a real experiential gap and ground to make up for me that didn't exist at Coinbase and Uber, right? At Uber, yeah, people use the app, but they didn't know how the app worked in its sort of underbelly. That could be something that we knew more internally. And so we were in this position of kind of better knowledge of the back end or how this thing works. Figma's a different beast in that, right? And so part of my job and challenge is, how do we think about that gap between what our customers know and what we know? How do we make up that ground as effectively and efficiently as possible? And that's triggered all sorts of thoughts and experiments and ways of teaching and new platforms and things so that we can think about how to do that and how to do it in sort of as little time as possible, right? I don't have a week where I can say, hey, go play with Figma and learn, in this rich play way, or here's some structured play and exploration we can do. We really have to do it efficiently with the time that we're given, for their training. So fun, really fun challenge, unique challenge with this particular piece of software. It's not only Figma, lots of, specialty software is like this, but my first foray into something like that. And some of my old tricks work and some of my old tricks don't work. So it's really thinking what's gonna be the right thing for this environment.
Got it. And this is for training the support folks. So these are
Yeah,
internal employees, but they're supporting your customers, right?
that's right.
And how much is it sort of like, here's this like learning on the side, and versus like it's kind of embedded into the product itself,
Yeah.
and like you in the flow of getting stuck, you can be like, click here and get unstuck and learn. How are you thinking about that? I'm curious.
Yeah, we think about that all the time, and luckily, I also run our documentation side of the house too. So where it doesn't make sense to do full blown training, or we're really thinking about reducing cognitive overload, we can make sure things are documented the right way, and then we have, AI tools and copilot tools that help support specialists in that moment maybe find answers that they want. They have a chatbot they can ask questions to. They have other resources they can bring in, combine with other resources that can help answer questions. So it's not just entirely like, go away, do this training, and then, hopefully you remember it 10 weeks from now when you're doing this, this customer interaction over email. There's a lot of stuff in the flow of work. And so that's even more than thinking through very deliberately, what do we want them to know? What do we want them to retain? What can they find as they're going about things, whether it's about the product or the process or the procedure or the policy that we want them to adhere to? How do we make sure they're able to find that? I get to run that team too. So I get to think through that very, very specifically and deliberately, where, I'm not having to just say, hopefully this training works and we'll see, a month from now. Yeah.
Yeah, got it, got it. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I'm curious, like, what's on the horizon? Like, you and I briefly talked about AI. We talked
Yeah.
about behavioral data,
Yeah.
and also not the kind of like this cross section of learning and development and knowledge management. So, how are you seeing the world kind of pan out? Like, where's the puck going?
Yeah. Well, uh, I'm certainly not a prophet to know all these things, but there are definitely things I've talked to you about and things I've, talked with others about. I'll give a couple things that, I see here, but also just wider world too. Like measurement is still a crucial skill and part of this process, right? And I think as L&D teams change and where they change within organizations, right? The crucial thing is still like, why is ours a function to invest in, right? Why are you or we as an L&D team change makers for an organization strategically, whether it's the skills we want them to have, the context they need to combine skills and tooling like AI. Um, what makes you guys the change levers that are worth investing in versus other change levers? And the best way to answer that is say, here's the programs that we've run, here's the success we've had as best as you can. It's a very hard question to relate that back to hard data all the time, but I wind up giving a lot of talks on survey design and assessments and some of these things that we can do that, if not perfectly answering that measurement on business impact, at least go further in doing that. And then where you can measure business impact, certainly try to. So measurement is one. The secondary layer on that does tie into measurement, and I just gave a talk about this and particularly passionate about it, is I do think that learning teams and businesses are about to get more data around how we work than we've ever really imagined. And that's really important for that first piece on measurement, because today we feel like, all right, well, we gave a feedback training. How the heck would I measure something like that, right? It feels like this foray into extremely unstructured data around the quantity and quality of a feedback that a manager is giving their direct report. But we're going to start to have that data, which is pretty crazy to say and think, but I don't think outlandish. Feedback might still be a little bit of a trickier one, but I think it's coming, right? And where I go with this is that uh, Microsoft, Salesforce, Google now are all sitting on an insane amount of employee data from their suite of products, of how we work, how many meetings we're in, who we're in meetings with, how long those meetings are, how many emails we read a day, how many Slack messages we read a day, what docs we're working on, what Figma, additions we've made, what Notion comments and pages we've looked at, all of these things. That is yet to be codified into like a set of how your organization works, but I don't think we're far away from it. There's a third party called Windmill I talk a lot about. That's a startup here in New York, around the corner from us. They're doing this across everything, where they are gathering from all the APIs of all the tooling that enterprise would use, this picture of how people are spending their time at work and what they're working on. There's a way to be very big brother about this, where it feels like you're being spied on. And there's a way to make this a very effective tool for managers to be coaching on. And that's where learning and development teams can come in, of what do we do with this data? And how do we show that our learning programs had impact? Because we said, hey, you should be meeting with your team more and providing feedback. And we can see that, yes, you are now meeting with your team more, and you are providing feedback through Lattice or Slack or Windmill. And we can look at your Slack and we can see what we can codify as feedback versus, delegation versus whatever, because that is actual data that we can structure and put into structured data sets. So the measurement skill feels very important for me because it's the way we show value. And right now we feel very stymied by not being able to measure a lot of things we want to. And I think that's going to change in the next 2 years, probably starting next year, where we have richer data sets around what people are doing and how well they're doing it. That second piece a little bit more difficultly, but it's coming, that we can then look at different training programs we have on so-called soft skills and do some measurement around them. And then it's up to L&D teams to show that, again, we are the right change makers and strategic people within that change that a CEO or leadership team can count on to say, this is not the way we want to be working, but it's what the data says. get us to this way of how we want to be working. And we'd like to see that. That
Got
was
it. So yeah. Well, so yeah, I remember I read this book once upon a time called The Decoded Company, and the idea was that we know so much more about our customers and our users than our own employees, right?
yeah,
And I think what you're talking about is like there's all this data internally, and like how do we glue all that together and actually make sense out of it?
yeah,
And once we do that, then we can see the impact of learning programs on moving specific needles.
yes,
And I did a little bit of that in Twitter engineering when I was there, and that was one of the reasons I went in. I was excited because suddenly I could see the commits, I could see the bugs or the feature shipped or like connected to employees and so on. So I was kind of geeking out on the data, and it's all overwhelming,
yeah.
and it's hard to figure out causation versus correlation sometimes. But I think AI is making a lot of that easier, and there's definitely um, and you mentioned next year possibly. There's the timing. It's about we're getting there, so that's exciting.
Close. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It is overwhelming, and the correlation causation is going to be something to work on. But like, I think that's such a good, like, somebody was like, oh, if we have this, we could start doing different, product market fit tests and see how people are responding to things and A/B tests. And like, yes, like everybody else at my company is doing that with our product, our design, our feature set, and the people side of how we actually work and run this business here and everywhere else, not doing anything like that. We're not optimizing the way that we know things can be optimized or improved or looked at. And it's because we don't have that data to come back and say, this is doing more of the thing that we want to do more of or not. Once we have it, you could start to really do some amazing things and testing and experiments and then look at different data. And yeah, like causation with human beings is always so hard, right? Like we're going to do better on days that we sleep, better the night before than not. And like, how do you deal with that? But aggregated with enough different data, that starts to fade away and you can get a little bit better of, no, that change we made really did drive, or at least really did influence this change that we like.
yeah, got it. So stepping, kind of like zooming out a little bit, looking at the arc of your career. So you started with English history, being a English history major who wanted to write a book. You
Yeah.
ultimately ended up writing a book, and then you went from a startup to Uber to LinkedIn Learning to Coinbase. Picked up a master's in data science along the way, and now you're at Figma. Looking back, what would be a piece of advice you would give to a younger self?
Oh, um, that's a good question. Where my mind is jumping is just like keep learning, right? And you know, I know learning styles is not a debate I'm about to have, nor care to, but that English major thing, seems so oddly fit right now, especially as I've kind of like right brained or left brain. I always forget which one it is over to the data side and like thinking through like, first principles thinking and all this. But what it gave me was just a great desire to read. And I love reading. And some of the best things I've learned are from reading articles and books and these things. And, I think AI is this amazing opportunity to personalize learning and give us these things. And whether you want to learn podcasts or reading or any of that, but I just like just having the drive to learn and grow yourself, even when it feels like that skill or something in that skill set might be obsolete. It's just like keeping that curiosity. So my advice to myself or anyone younger would just be like, stay hungry to learn, find your best way of learning and try to get as much input as you can to make sense of, because somewhere down the line, at some point, it's gonna be meaningful. I don't know. It rears its head in ways you don't expect. Um,
Yeah,
even the data thing, right? Like it seems so far away from being an English major, and yet the data doesn't mean that much unless you tell a story. And the stories that we tell are still like the stories that we tell. Like, what is the conflict? What's the villain here? What's the hero, right? Like, what gets us out of this bad point? And that's just like the underpinning of so many stories. And it looks different in a business sense, but at its core, it's kind of doing the same thing, right? So Still influencing. Yeah.
Got it. So learning as a superpower, and then curiosity as sort of the gateway to that. So love it. Well, Eric, thank you so much. Awesome share, learning from you. I love your career. It's so inspiring, and I'm excited about what's next. And thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you, Marco. Thanks for having me.
Of course. That's it for this episode of the Intelligence Amplifiers. If you like what you've heard, be sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss out on the future episodes. And if you're interested in being a guest or have a question, check out the episode description for how to reach us. Also, don't forget to check out Plus Plus, the platform that makes collective intelligence at scale possible. Find out more at plusplus.co. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep amplifying.